So we did our factory reset. We reconfigured the management plane interface address on the management interface itself to .51, and we also verified CLI access with SSH. We verified the GUI access via a browser via HTTPS. So those are both done. So our next step is to configure a default route. And the reason that's needed is because by itself, this firewall does not know how to reach out to the cloud, which is super important for connecting with Fortinet services, including registration if that hasn't already been done, and also doing updates regarding its definitions and firmware that can all be done online. So as part of this step, let's confirm the current routing in place. And then what we'll do is we'll add a default route. And then if you need to get access to the internet, go ahead and use the IP address of 192.168.1.1 as the next hop for the default route. And here in my lab network, that .1 address is all set up with routing and address translation to allow traffic from this firewall to get out to the public internet. So without further ado, let's head over to the firewall, let's confirm our routing, and then we'll add our default route. So here at the firewall, I have timed out because 5 minutes have gone by, so I'll log back in as admin, and I'll put in the new password, and we are now logged in. So I don't need to migrate, so I'll click on later. And this takes us back to where we left off, and that was the interfaces pane here in the left navigation under network. So here's our management interface, there's its IP address, and there's the three protocols that are being allowed: ping, HTTPS, and SSH. And we're currently connected via HTTPS. So to view the current routing that is in place on this firewall, if we go to the dashboard and then under dashboard, go to network, this is a great way to see what's in place. So here's a widget for static and dynamic routing, and this firewall is telling us here that it knows about 2 networks. So if we click here on this widget to expand it, it's showing us here we have 2 directly connected networks. And one of those is right here, that's our management network, the 192.168.1 network. And then it also has for us configured an IP address on a logical interface called LAN, and it's using 192.168.100. So in another set of videos, we'll take care of this LAN logical interface because we're not going to be using the 192.168.100 network. But for now, what we need is we need an additional default route, because at this moment, this firewall only knows about those 2 directly connected networks and has no idea about forwarding to the next hop of .1 as a default route. So to add a default route, it can be done at the command line, but since we're here in the GUI, it's a lot easier right here. To configure a default route, we'd go to network. So here with the network section expanded, we'd then go to static routes right here. And with static routes selected, we'd click right here on create new. And then we simply put in the details. So here's the syntax for a default route. And for the gateway address, which is the next hop address for that default route, we're going to use 192.168.1.1, which in my lab network here in my home office, that is the IP address of the default gateway, who is going to be used as part of the default route here on the FortiGate. So check this out. I'm going to hit the tab key. And when I do, it automatically says, oh, we'll use the management interface. So if we hover over the management interface, the reason it's going to use that interface in combination with the default route is because that management interface is on the same network, 192.168.1. So the firewall knows that to reach the next hop address for the default route, that the management interface is the interface it's going to use. So it automatically populated that for us. And then we'll take the defaults for administrative distance, and we'll talk more about administrative distance and different types of routing in a separate set of videos. But for now, we now have a default route, or we will once we click on OK. And unlike some firewalls, we don't have to go through another step. So there's no second commit statement or anything else we have to do. That default route is now in play. So to verify that, we could go to the dashboard, and under dashboard, we click on network, and here we go back to the routing widget, and now it's showing us that we have 2 directly connected networks and 1 static route. And that's the default static route we just configured. So if we click on that, here is that default route. That says, if you don't have a more specific route in your routing table, go ahead and forward to the next IP address of 192.168.1.1, which is my default router here in the office. And it's its job to make a further routing decision towards the internet, including doing things like address translation that are needed for this firewall to get to the internet. So there's a few options for verifying now that this firewall can actually reach the internet using the default route. And one would be just doing a simple ping to ping something out on the internet, like a Google DNS server at 8888 or some other resource. Or we could go ahead and do our registration at the firewall. And if the registration is working where it connects to the Fortinet servers and updates the registration, that would also be a good indication that it works. Or we can also verify that DNS is working from the firewall. So let's do some tests just to verify that this firewall has access now to the internet using the default route. So one way of doing the ping would be to use this option right here. So in the upper right-hand corner, there's a shortcut for a command line. So effectively, this gives us a command line interface. If we're using the GUI, a command line interface to the firewall. So here we have the firewall prompt. We already logged into the GUI, so we're already logged in here. So we type in execute ping, and then we can specify an IP address like 8888. And if that works, which it looks like it is, that implies connectivity using our default route. And if we did an execute ping to www. Let's go ahead and go to Fortinet.com and press enter. That is a great sign. That implies that DNS is also working because it resolved the name www.fortinet.com over to an IP address and then proceeded to do the ping. Let me go ahead and close that CLI. Another way to test would be to go to the networking section here and go to DNS. And here it has 2 default FortiGuard servers for DNS. It's also indicating here that we have reachability to those DNS servers, which is a great sign. Or if we went to System and went to Firmware and Registration right here, because they already registered this firewall, it's showing as registered. So on a brand new firewall where we hadn't yet had internet access to do that initial registration, here we could go ahead and attempt that registration. And if we have routing in place for the management plane, the firewall should be able to reach out to the internet, to the Fortinet servers online, and do the registration. And sometimes that registration may take somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on how busy the servers are. So once you've had connectivity out to the internet, you verify that, for example, with a ping, and then you've come here, just be aware it may take a few minutes for that registration to be completed. Also, another step right here regarding firmware and registration under system is that if you have an older version of software, for example, 7.2 or 7 something, then you want to upgrade, you could also do the upgrade right here. So as we proceed through this course together, I'll walk you through one of the updates on one of the other firewalls. This one is currently up to date. Also right here, I'd like to mention this option right here, which is F for feature. So if you have a firmware version that says feature right here, that is not a great idea for production. So I'm using it because I want to use the latest and greatest version of software. But in a production environment, we want to have a M version, which is mature. So it'll say mature there, which implies that the M version, the mature version, has been tested and verified, and there's not as many surprise bugs or updates that will need to be done for full functionality. So in the labs, I'm going to be using the feature option because I want the latest and greatest version. But in a production environment, we'd want to stick with the M flavor because it's going to be more stable. We'll have less surprises. But once again, here in the lab environment, I'm going to be using the feature version because I want you to use the latest and greatest for the demonstrations.